Hello, my friends. This is life coach Mike Trugman, and welcome to an episode of Mike's Search for Meaning. I'm after some big questions. Why are we here? What makes a fulfilling life? How can we grow individually and collectively? Each episode, I'll dive deep with leaders who are doing great work in the world and see how they organize their life. Books read, value systems, resources used, and stories that show how each of you can create the life and the world of your dreams. All right, Erin and listeners, thank you so much for being here with me today. A little rusty. It's been a while since I've recorded a podcast, but it felt really important to me to create this conversation and to create this with you, Erin. About a month and a half ago, I made the choice to end my 11-year public accounting career. And there are lots of elements of what went into that choice, what's happened since. There's so many different things I wanted to dive into with you, Erin. And before that, let me just share a couple of things. Logistical things. I still have a hard time promoting myself, but I wanted to, on the intro, there's a couple of ways that you can connect with me. If this conversation feels like something that you're drawn to, if there's something about my way of being that resonates with you as a listener, I'm in the midst of right now coaching 100 people in the next 100 days. The 100th day will be June 20th. And I've had the privilege of coaching 8 people so far, and about 20 of the 100 conversations are booked. And whenever you're listening to this, there's probably a chance that there's some slots that are open. I definitely encourage you to take me up on it. The sessions that I've done so far have been really powerful. And I think Erin would probably agree that every coaching session, that you're going to get something out of it. And so if you find yourself curious about that, I'm going to make a link to book a session with me in the show notes. And anyway, that's not at all what this conversation today is about. Erin, thank you for being here with me. I'm going to hand it over to you. Where do you want to drive me and drive this conversation?
Ooh, well, first, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I shared with you before we started, I've truly never been on a podcast. So I love that I get to mostly be the listener in this one for my first time. And even in what you shared in the introduction, I just want to recognize all the courage that it takes to make a shift like that. You know, from our early conversations, I made a similar shift, although mine was after 22 years. Some differences for sure, but also a ton of similarities. And my heart was like feeling kind of all the feelings again that come with being in that moment where you just made a pretty major choice and shift. And then to already be coaching 100 people in 100 days is like extra courage, like courage on fire. So I just want to start with saying, like, wow, we haven't technically begun the conversation, but there's already so much there.
Thank you, Erin. And we clearly work in multiples of 11. For me, it was 11 years in my field. For you, 22. So there's maybe there's something there, but that could just be my inner accountant speaking.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, there's so many cool places we can take this, but I guess my initial curiosity is when you decided to brush the dust off and get back into this particular episode, what was really drawing you?
I think that there's a couple of things. One, selfishly, I just wanted to have a timestamp of this really memorable chapter in my life. I'm a father to a 19-month-old, and when he was born, I remember feeling so stretched and so challenged, and I felt like it was this secret. I mean, I knew that parenthood was really challenging and could bring you to your knees and be really hard, but I don't think I didn't know if there was anyone who gave a real inside look to what do the first few weeks look like. And I recorded a solo episode when my son was, I think he was 5 weeks old. So I was really in the thick of, that period of time. And the same kind of thing was happening. On one hand, selfishly, I wanted a timestamp. I think it's really beautiful that there's a recorded conversation that I can go back to that, I'm going to be able to remember exactly what I was going through at that time in my life that was so rich for self-discovery and was really exciting, but also really painful. And the same kind of thing is happening here in that there aren't many people that maybe there are, but I'm just not aware. There aren't that many people that I've seen that after making the choice are already talking about the success that they are experiencing of like, I made the choice and that in and of itself is the success. I hear a lot of people on podcasts or who speak publicly talk about in we'll call it like a 5 or 10 year hindsight, like they reflect on how hard it was in the beginning, but they're saying it from a period of their life where they've already achieved quote unquote success. And I am right now in the throes of my last day at my accounting firm, I think was February 24th. Recording day right now is April 2nd. And I was working with 5 one-on-one clients on my last day at the accounting firm. And I'm working with the same 5 one-on-one clients right now. And it still feels like I am experiencing success and made the absolute right choice and have grown immensely over that time. So that's what felt important about this specific time, is that I'm not speaking from a place of, wow, look how far I've come. I'm kind of in the thick of the choice and still navigating. It feels really fresh right now.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm really struck by this notion of a timestamp conversation. I never really thought about a podcast in that way, but hearing that you did one like right in the thick of your son being a newborn, and I'm sure if you went back through all 100 plus episodes, there's like something you were in each of those, some part of every transition that's constantly being threaded together. So that's really cool. And I appreciate that you're willing to step out and share what it's like right in the thick of this moment, because I think a lot of times when we're contemplating change, it's just so uncertain what it will feel like. That's part of why we avoid it. And so through sharing what that's like in the thick of it and then in the days to come, I'm sure for someone out there, they'll be able to relate to, oh, there's at least one experience of what it was like, a couple months after truly leaving a chapter in a career.
And that's really when you boil it down, that's ultimately what my hope is with this conversation, is that it speaks to that one person who is not sure and feels like maybe it is the right time, that they're not sure. Or actually, let me correct them. They're not sure. There's some part of them that knows it's the right time and is really terrified of how it might go, and need someone to speak to, regardless of the outcome. It was the right choice, because that's ultimately, that feels really important.
Yeah, you're hitting on something that was one of my curiosities already in this conversation. And I know it's not always easy to go backward, but do you remember when those early whispers began for you? Like that quiet voice that was saying, I don't know if this is it, or maybe there's something more.
Well, there's so many layers to this. This might be a really long-winded answer. I think that there were the initial whispers of there's something more started before I had any idea where that might lead. If we go back, rewind 6 or 7 years now, in 2018, I had been in public accounting for about 6 years at that point, and I reached a certain level in my career that I had been chasing for my whole professional career. Like, I was making 6 figures, I had the title that I always wanted, and it felt I felt emptier than I had ever felt professionally in my whole life at that point. So I definitely came to a realization that something wasn't right and wanted to explore that. And I had no idea what that might look like. And I remember, this isn't the first time that I shared this publicly. In 2018, it was my then girlfriend. She's my now wife. November into December of 2018, we went to Thailand, and there was something about having the space away. And I was at a particularly really hard time in my career. Like, I was on a really tough project. It was mundane. It was really hard. I was responsible for running a team of about 10 people, and the project wasn't going well either. So not only was it something that felt soul crushing and lacked total fulfillment, it also was, I was also being come down on for not doing a good job. And so there was a ton of stress being put on me. And I'm really grateful that I had the time to go away to Thailand, because that opening for me, being away for 2 weeks, allowed me to, from a really grounded place, make the first kind of grounded conclusion that I needed to make a change in my life. So that was the first wave. At that point, I recognized this long term wasn't going to be the thing for me. I'll spare all the details of like how the 5 years went that led into me leaving accounting for good a month and a half ago. But those were the whispers of let's pick a new path. The whispers of I'm ready to leave once and for all probably started to happen the end of 2024. At about this time last year, I was returning from my paternity leave. So that's another transformative time that we could have a separate conversation about. But 3 months of being totally removed from my professional life, that there was a lot of reflection going on. And there was like this deep calling in me, especially with my son being so little. I felt this kind of newfound sense of deep purpose and wanted to model to my son what type of man I would want him to be, or what type of person I would want him to be. And so on the heels of my paternity leave, I invested the most money I've ever invested to work with a business coach. And it was a 6-month program. It was a group of 7 other coaches. And it was really focused on all of the aspects that make a thriving coaching business. And when I enrolled, I was going to say I was a really good coach. And even that, I didn't fully believe that about myself. I had a lot of limiting beliefs about what type of coach I was, and benchmarked against other more established, successful coaches. But I really was only focused on the coaching side of things and being someone who created really safe space for people to have transformation in their lives. But I had no business skill. I mean, very little. And that's maybe a slight exaggeration, but I focused a lot of last year on how to create deeper connection with people, how to charge a lot of money to work with me for a long time. And that money is a powerful gauge for someone's commitment. For me to get out of my own way with that. So there were like sales, marketing components, feeling a more embodied sense of purpose, and like, why am I a coach? When I come into contact with another human being, like, how do I aspire to be? Who do I aspire to be? What are my gifts? Where can I improve? And I say all this to say that 6 months of really dedicated work on the business side of coaching led to a place where I started to feel like, okay, this isn't just a hobby or something I love doing. It's something that feels viable. And I started for the first time working with pretty high paying clients who not only were high paying, but were like, I looked forward to every session with them and felt like they were making really big transformations in their life. I loved it. They were loving it. And it still felt far away from, like, financially, I thought I'd be at a certain point when I left my accounting firm, and I never reached that point. But the whispers started getting really loud in January. And maybe another thing that's important to say here, structurally, I was working part-time 3 days a week at my accounting firm since November 2021. And 2 days a week were fully devoted to coaching, Thursdays and Fridays. I had a great arrangement at my previous employer, but my hours started to come down on them in August of 2024. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information, a lot of dates around here, but hopefully you're able to track. Yeah, I think that the way that I've made meaning of this, the universe started to put pressure on me in by the way of I was scrutinized at my accounting firm. My hours were low. Every single month, my hours were not coming in. I felt a kind of a lack of motivation, but I was also pushing uphill to try and make it work. I was really clinging on and grasping to there's this steady stream of income that has really supported me as I try and get my coaching business off the ground, and that started to really slip away from me, and that my sense of stability there really was no longer. I mean, I didn't feel I felt like I was going to be put on a performance plan, which never ended up happening, but it felt like it could. I mean, every single month from August, Mike, your hours were low again, what's going on? September, Mike, your hours are low again, and rightfully so. I was being paid really well, and I wasn't performing up to what I should have. And so if you couple the pressure that I was feeling and coming into tax season, which is still ongoing right now, April 2nd, couple that with the business acumen and skill set that I developed in the past year, the whispers really, despite there being so much noise and like, oh my God, am I going to be able to do this? And like trying to make things work and feeling stretched in a thousand directions, that the whispers were really there. And we could talk more about how painful it was, because I really wanted to for this to be an authentic conversation. But there was a moment in early February where I felt like I was begging the universe for answers, and I don't know what to do. And I had this moment of stillness, and I'm closing my eyes right now because it was a really powerful moment where I just said to myself, what if I were to leave this job and give myself 3 months? And I just felt from a place of beforehand kind of panic and really holding on tightly, I felt myself just open up. And as I imagined those 3 months and the runway that I would have if I had that space, it just felt right. And in the past, from an ego driven place, I felt like I wanted this thing so badly and was chasing it. But I don't think that I was actually in a really ready place to start to take on such a big endeavor, right? To like, I don't think I would have been able to handle what I'm currently standing here handling right now. A month where no income was created would have totally knocked me off kilter. And I've developed the skill set to be able to navigate that. So when I sat with that question of like, what would happen if I were to leave for 3 months at least, uh, and give myself that runway, it just felt right. I'll pause there. I know there's a lot of things that we could continue to unspool from there, but like, what stands out to you, and where do you want to take me?
Oh, so many things because I love to just sit back and kind of look at patterns and themes. And so I felt like that was a perfect example of really just taking all that in. And maybe I'll share a few things that started to and some things like becomes more pixelated or less pixelated. I'm not sure which one it is, clear.
Yeah,
But yeah, you mentioned being away in Thailand. Am I saying that right?
yeah,
When you were
yeah,
traveling? And then also the space during paternity leave being two times where I almost see that as there's so much noise and fast pace. I think that we're all like we're in that river all the time. And we may have the whisper, the discomfort of like, "Ooh, I'm feeling pressure. This project is tough. I'm, getting this feedback." But it's hard to know what to do about that or with that. And it feels like you had these at least two, maybe some more throughout, where in stepping away from it all in some way, you were able to have more insight drop in, at least like a clear nudge around like it's time to do some things differently. So that's interesting because I think that alone could be a first step for someone is just
yes,
to call a timeout of some way. That could be one day where you take yourself to the coffee shop and just allow for a different pace, or it could be a trip or, some type of life change. A lot of new insight can come when you just enter the room through a different door. And it sounds like you had a few of those during that stretch.
It's a great catch. And then something else that's coming up for me, because it wasn't on the heels of a lot of space or like a huge pattern interrupt in my life that I made this particular change. But what's coming up for me is that space can be really allow for insight to drop in, and being in pain of some kind can give you the impetus to make a big change. And I think that in this case, I was put in enough pain being the pressure on my hours, the misalignment of the work. I mean, something I didn't mention, which was also contributing to the pain. I was being put on a bunch of new projects that I had no idea what I was doing on. So, yeah, to give a specific example, there was one, without getting into divulging personal information. There was a project that I was put on that had a lot going on. It probably would have been hundreds of hours of time on my end, and I was a manager, so there were staff level people were actually doing the legwork, and I would be reviewing it, and then it would end up going to a partner. And I had no idea what I was doing on these projects. I mean, the poor partner that I was working with would have to walk me. She spent 2 hours on the phone with me one day, just teaching me fundamental basics that probably an entry level person would have the same level of knowledge that I had. And so, as these multiple projects, there were probably 70 projects within this umbrella of this client. There were so many people turning to me for answers, and I just kept sending them to other people because I had no idea what to do. And navigating all that while having the pressure on my hours, while having real deadlines to meet. Accounting is a very deadline driven field. It put me in so much pain that I had nights that I mean, there's one night in particular, I'm getting choked up thinking about it. I felt like I wasn't there while my wife was playing with my son, and my son would come up to me with various bids for attention, and I was just curled up in a ball on my couch and either crying or sometimes even groaning. Like I was really, really struggling. And that wasn't just a one night thing. There was an extended period of time where that was happening. And I can look back, even with just a little bit of hindsight, that necessitated the change that I went through. That if I wasn't put in that level of pain, I don't know if I would have had. People tell me, you have so much courage for doing what you're doing, Mike. And yes, I receive that and acknowledge that. And it does take courage, but I also really was in a lot of pain and was out of alignment in so many ways. So space is a beautiful thing to have, to allow for insight to drop in, and pain sometimes can force your hand. And luckily for me at this point, the pain, it wasn't just a run away from. I had that moment that I just spoke about, of real stillness, of if I left, I'm going to be okay. And I know it, and it's not conditional, and it doesn't depend on how many clients I have or how this quote unquote goes. I just know that this is the right next move.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting for you to even just dive into the pain, the discomfort part, because there's actually a lot in there too. If you were in a situation that was painful, but you really wanted it, like you really wanted to see it through, it was meaningful to you, then that's a different path, right? So I'm imagining too, it's that awareness or the willingness to look and say, what is success to me? Like, what do I want? Because it's also completely new territory to dive into coaching and the business and all the aspects that you mentioned earlier, but you're willing to navigate that discomfort because you want it. You want the impact that's on the other side of that. So it's just making me think of how like everyone's discomfort is different, you
Yes.
know, for a different reason. And it's like being willing to actually feel it, take a look at it. What part of this is me? What part of this is not aligned? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Pain's a teacher, a guider if you let it.
Yeah, that's and when pain is coming from a place of like currently where I'm at, when it's coming from a place of when I experience pain today as it pertains to my business, meaning like let's just say I perceive that a coaching session didn't go well, or I'm not happy with the financial targets that or I didn't reach my financial targets rather. It's coming from a place of like deep purpose. I feel like the pain is, can I navigate not getting what I thought I wanted versus the pain of this isn't the right place to be. And so that's, yeah, luckily I've worked with really skilled coaches and have connected with other amazing people like you who can help me differentiate between those two things, because there are different textures to different feelings, and there's different meanings that we could attribute to all these different things. So yeah, another interesting catch there.
I love it. So I'm thinking about that path that you walked me through from like the early whispers to today. The other thing I was really hearing through that, like maybe under the surface, was there's so much action that happened during that time. Like you weren't just in the discomfort got worse and then you left, right? Like there were so many, it sounds like so many steps where you were, I'd imagine there was a process of even discovering that coaching was something you'd be interested in. So, yeah, can you talk about just some of the actions that you started after that initial, like, it's time for a new path?
Yeah, let's fill in some gaps. I had so when I came to that realization in Thailand, I had no idea what the next thing would be, but I previously it was just all in my head and I took zero external action. So the first thing that happened was I reached out to my friend who's a recruiter in the tax field, and even that was a huge step for me to say, you know what, because I had been at one job my whole career, and even just opening myself to interviewing, that was a big thing. I was really nervous about interviewing. Historically, I've been very shy and very scared of being seen and being found out. Those are, people call it imposter syndrome, that was all really present for me. So the first step was just taking some sort of action, and that was to speak to my friend who's a recruiter. But that, I started to feel like that wasn't the right thing either. That was a band-aid. So yeah, I quickly realized that I didn't want to get placed in another tax job. So two things happened. One, I started to interview at places that would have been industry changes. So a couple sales jobs. I looked in the tech field. And looking back, even as I'm speaking about this now, at the time, it took a lot of courage for me to start to open myself to all these different things. And as someone who didn't like feeling rejected, I was getting rejected a lot. So that was one element, was I started to explore career change. Another was I wanted to hire someone to help me figure out what the next move was going to be. Instead of just spraying and praying, which is kind of what I was doing, I actually hired a life coach, and I spoke to a few different people, and God, I don't even remember how I came across life. Like, I don't remember. If someone asked me right now, when do you remember learning what coaching was? I actually don't remember, but I think, come the beginning of 2019, I had been in therapy for a while. It felt nice to be seen and heard, but it didn't feel like it was creating sustainable change in my life. And I guess I was just exploring and wanted to try something different. And the gentleman I ended up hiring, his name is Michael Stern. There was just something about his presence and relatability that I felt like, you know what, I'm going to do this thing. And at the time, it was a big investment of money and energy and time. But I felt like he had been in my shoes and that he could help me. I felt like he could really guide me towards what the next best step was. So we contracted to work together for 3 months. And during that 3 month period, every session we met weekly, so 12 times. Every session felt like it was another level of transformation for me. And, one of the exercises I did was to write down 5 absolute, don't worry about if they're possible, just write down 5 absolute dream jobs. Like if you could be doing anything or have any impact on the world, what would it be? And they all spoke to some level of creating change person to person. So me being someone who was an educator or facilitator or coach, I don't know if those were the exact words I used, but I wanted to make a difference in the education system. I wanted to make a difference around homelessness. They were all like human caring based things. And ultimately what I arrived at the time, I also was like really interested in the healing power of food, and like different movement practices started to come into my view. And like my brain and curiosity started to open up in ways that it was previously, I felt like I was in this little bubble of a world. And I had this moment of, wow, coaching creates that for a lot of people. Coaching is in a way, one way you could describe it is, uh, it takes someone who has seen the world a certain way for a really long time and shows them there's a new way of being, and a new life out there if you choose into that. And let's work on that, but also let's be really honest about what might be getting in the way. And having that experience of working with Michael, I came to the recognition I want to have that impact on other people. So that choice was made in 2019. I enrolled for a coach certification at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition because, like I said, I was really drawn to the healing power of food. And I felt like, man, if I could show people how to eat healthy, live healthy, their life will transform. So that was kind of the first step that I took towards being a coach. And couple that with, I started a blog at around the same time, which was my first kind of public facing, I'm going to have a persona that shows up to the world as someone who's got something to say about these things, not someone who's just curious and ingests podcasts and actually eats well, but someone who has a voice around this, like can talk about meditation, can talk about nutrition, can talk about healthy movement. Maybe another part of my story that feels important to share here is my number one fear my whole life was public speaking. And somewhere in that time period, like 2018, 2019, maybe even a little bit earlier, I was asked to lead a big presentation at my accounting firm and totally panicked. And I hired someone to support me with my fear of public speaking. And I hired someone one-on-one to help me with that because I figured if I mess up in front of her, at least it's not in front of a whole room of people. So I want to work with one person. That's how big my fear of public speaking was. I couldn't even practice it in a group. And so I started to take a bunch of classes and noticed improvement there. And so all these there was a confluence of so many factors of like, through various channels was learning so much about myself and transcending past ways of operating in the world, and felt like, wow, I'm not this static person who's going to go through life the same way my whole life. I'm evolving, I'm growing. I never thought I would have a podcast. So to see that level of transformation happening in real time, I felt like, all right, you know what? This is something that I can really speak to. And that was another thing that I included in my blog too. As part of my first post was sharing my story and why I started the blog. And my fear of public speaking was part of that. I really wanted to share with people why this work mattered to me so much. And yeah, I remember the day. It was April actually of 2019. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember I have a visual of walking around in my accounting office that day, and just every single person I passed being scared. God, did they read my blog post? And what do they think about me that I shared that? And I felt so naked and vulnerable, and yet this deep, deep calling within me, right? There's clearly something that was so important to me that I, despite all the fears and feeling naked and afraid and vulnerable, that I wanted to still share that. So that was kind of my first actual step into, I'm doing this thing. I've signed up for certification. I have a blog. I mean, I remember having to prep some of my friends about this. I thought like they might laugh at me and they would be really surprised that I'd be doing this. So it was a huge deal to take that step. And over the course of, as I started the certification in the middle of 2019, I think I was still in ingest mode and learn mode and not outward facing as much. I still posted a few blogs, but that became cumbersome while still navigating a full-time job. And the beginning of 2020, right before COVID, is when I started to see clients, and it was all for free. And that's when my view of coaching evolved rapidly, which is I'm not just, as I talk to people, I'm not just helping them I'm not giving them answers about what the best food is to eat. Cause a lot of, I could just tell everyone right now, here's a good diet and here's how you follow it. I started for the first time to see that similar patterns were showing up in all areas of their life. And even when people signed up to work with me around their food, we would talk about their relationships. We would talk about their careers. We talk about any number of different ways that they felt like I'm not showing up the way that I really want to deep down inside. And so it pretty quickly evolved from health coaching into kind of just vast coaching. And we can get more into the way I view that now, but that there was really a 3-year period where I started to just immerse myself into what does it mean to be a really effective coach, and how do you create sustainable behavior change with people, and like what are the real limitations that get in someone's way, and really kind of deep dives into how the brain works. And neuroscience has become really popular. Andrew Huberman has totally blown up. So I found that was part of it, is just understanding how the brain works. I found myself really curious about the nervous system. As someone who had a lifelong fear of public speaking, one of the least helpful things that you could ever tell me was, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. The worst case is you mess up in front of everyone and you're not actually going to die. Like that made zero change in my nervous system. So I got really curious about, well, what, I've heard lots of people talk about how they used to be shaking talking in front of a room of 5 people who now have given TED Talks. What allowed them to do that? And not only to do that, but to feel like their outlook on life looks like they're pretty happy and fulfilled and content, and they're married to their dream partner and like all these things. So I became the consummate student of all things human behavior, and all the while started to build my skill set around being an effective coach. So I think that there was always a natural affinity for being a good listener and being the type of person that people would want to share their quote unquote real challenges with, whether they were feeling stuck in their career or there was something going on in their relationships. Maybe they felt like it's time for me to break up with my partner, but I haven't found the courage within me to follow through on that. I was always naturally that person. And now, interestingly, like while I had a natural talent, coaching became it was challenging for me to actually step into that as a way that I could make a living. And a couple of other things I'll share, and then I'll hand it back to you, because I think there's a few different interesting avenues we might go to from here. I felt like there were 2 huge challenges early on when it came to coaching. One was I always found myself wanting to just share my own advice, and it felt like a lot of times the resolution to challenges would feel really clear to me. And based on my own worldview and my projections, I would just shower the people I was working with my opinions and my views. And that felt good to my ego, because I felt like, oh, I know stuff and I'm really helping them. And it feels good on some level to the person that's hearing that, because it feels like, oh, he's got answers and I want answers. So that one of the first challenges I had was being able to really slow down and to go a little bit deeper with people. And the second, there were many challenges, but the second really big one was money. That it felt really hard for me to, what it felt like at the time, ask for money. And it felt like the people that I was asking for money were doing me a favor. And I felt all of my, please don't reject me, please like me, uh, parts come online. And, that led to a lot of messy conversations when it came time to, so Mike, what does it look like to work with you longer term? I just wanted to help everybody and say, oh, I don't need money. I just want to help you. That's all I want is to help you. So there was years, that's still an ongoing thing to work on both of those things, to work on jumping in and giving advice, and my relationship with money and charging a fee to work with me. But that definitely, thank you for inviting me to go a little bit deeper into it. Would be a really big disservice to just gloss over the Thailand trip and then just kind of plop me right into today. uh, was there anything more that you think would be helpful to dive more deeply into? That was I think a good synopsis of how the 5 years kind of went.
Yeah. I mean, just that there's so much action and like support seeking and learning, and that I think sometimes being the person going through it, you may not even recognize like all of those little micro steps that I know I see people not taking or finding themselves stuck, multiple coaches that you invested in yourself to work with, whether that was your initial coach or the public speaking coach, the program to learn, and then even all of the learning through practice, like experimenting and coaching so many people. Like I just hear like action and learning, throughout so much of that. And all of that is an important in between the whisper and the leap, right? Like there's just so many pieces in there. So yeah, that was what struck me as you were sharing.
Hmm. Yeah, and now I'm feeling called to, one of the things that I didn't speak to that really supported me. I think it was the most impactful thing that I did to support me in becoming the coach I am today, is in May of 2021, I started working with a coach. His name is Yotam Shachter, and I worked with him for over 3 years. And I started working with him because I noticed all these big changes were happening in my life, but I still didn't feel like a general sense of contentment. I felt like I was still being really hard on myself. Um, I felt overly attached to outcomes in my life. And at that point, I started to open up a lot more spiritually too, in that there was a recognition of some kind that a lot of the pain and suffering that I was experiencing was because I was just over analyzing and in my head so much. And that uh, I started to become in touch with the fact that living in your head all the time doesn't create for the full experience of life. So when I started working with Yotam in the middle of 2021, we mostly used a modality called internal family systems, which helped me to, I guess, identify how complex of a person I am, that I have many different needs. B, to honor that none of these needs are good, bad, right, or wrong, that they're all needs, and that each part of me matters, and that when I pay attention to each part of myself, then good things happen. And to tie this back to, as I started to talk about sustainable change before, through the nervous system and through understanding the brain, one of the ways to foster really sustainable change is to understand how dynamic you are, and that you have so many different needs, and that you're like a constantly evolving person. And me investing a lot of time, energy, and money into working through that, really, it expanded me in ways that are hard to even put into words. And one of the things I lead with these days is that I think the way to sustainable change and the way to a good life is with kindness towards oneself and self-compassion. Those were things that I had heard about, but I wasn't actually in the practice of doing. And in working with Yotam, like those, I could start to see the impact that had on me. To maybe give a specific example, I would beat myself up for not being able to have hard conversations with my wife, or to be able to like ask for a raise at work, or things like that. Uh, and when we slowed down and did parts work and understood internal family systems is also called parts work. When we slowed down and connected with the times where maybe I did speak up and I was ridiculed for it in some way, it was really healing to meet that part of myself and say, it's okay that you were scared, Mike, and I get that would be really hard to face that type of situation, and honor the fear and honor whatever other feelings might come up. That really opened up a lot in me. And I worked with him for over 3 years, because every single session there were new layers and more depth that would emerge. And it helped me see myself more clearly and helped me get in touch with what I desired in my life more clearly. And it helped me also see people in general more clearly. So when I'm sitting across from another human being now, I feel like I can see who they are with a lot more clarity and less projection of my own stuff onto them. Another important part of that time period was when I started working with Yotam in May of 2021. He, from the onset, said 6 months from now you're going to be leaving your accounting job for good. And I actually put in my notice with the accounting firm that I just left in May of 2021. I said in 6 months I'm going to be out of here. And they always knew that I was going to be pursuing coaching, and so it didn't come as a surprise to them, and it was met very receptively. And at some point early on in my time working with Yotam, we came to the agreement mutually. Well, first he told me it doesn't seem like it's a good idea right now to be leaving full time. And that was really, because I was so excited to be leaving in 2021. It was a painful realization to come to, but I wasn't ready. And that feels like an important thing to speak to here as well. Is that this goal of mine to leave accounting, it was present for a really long time, but I wasn't actually ready until I was. And there was something really powerful actually about just admitting to myself, I really want this thing, but I'm not ready. And that's okay. It doesn't mean anything about me. I'm not a failure. Just not ready. Let's take that as a neutral statement. So instead of leaving for good, I decided to go part-time. And that's when November 2021, instead of leaving totally, I went part-time. And it was really important to have that stability for the time that I did. And I think that entrepreneurship and coaching can get glorified and glamorized. There's this kind of burn the ships at the shore mentality that's present a lot, which is when you know you're ready, you got to just go for it. And you're holding yourself back. And like, sure, that might be true some of the time, but that wasn't the case for me. And that felt it to be in integrity today. It feels important to say that the goal was there for a long time, and I wasn't ready until I was.
Yeah. Oh, I love that additional chapter because it's so different to be learning about what you might want to do and then starting to interview and explore that and coach. That's a ton of learning that you had talked about. But then this other part you pulled in really was like self-learning, like
Yes,
really getting intimate with your own inner landscape and like all that that opened up to the point where you realized it wasn't time for you.
yes,
Yeah, that's huge.
it is. And I was showing up at a lot of things happened within my accounting firm, right? Like I think another thing that happened in my work with Yotam was I started to realize to attach my purpose to coaching is a very limited way to move through my life. And the person that I aspired to be, it was available in some way for me to show up in all areas of my life like that. So if I wanted to be like an open-hearted person that inspired change or saw the absolute best in people, and then here I am at my accounting firm showing up just glued to the desk, not talking to other people, making myself small and invisible. Uh, it's that's going to permeate into other areas of my life. So um, I at the time that I started working with him, I had a pretty narrow scope of what success would look like, and to expand the apparatus really helped. And what one tangible outcome that happened was I started to do a lot more workshops at my accounting firm that were coaching adjacent, like how to avoid workplace burnout, and I would talk about things that I thought accountants wouldn't be interested in at all, but they were really striking a chord, like having a deep sense of community and a clear sense of meaning and purpose in your life. Uh, and I would talk about esoteric things like breath work and things of that nature. And people were really responding to it. And uh, yeah, I wanted to throw that in there because it's easy to attach the like this, I need to do this thing, otherwise my life isn't complete. But a lot of the inner work that I did helped me to show up more fully in all the areas of my life and to see possibility, um, regardless of where I was. So I would say, from my current vantage point, I'm opting into coaching. But if you were to place me in uh, a mailroom at the bottom of an office building right now, I would still aspire to be that type of person who's going the extra mile and who is, making someone's day by being kind, is being thoughtful, and is remembering that person's dog's name and or writing down their birthday. Like that's just integrated into who I am. And that, I don't say that to brag. I say that to say that's the real work of coaching. Is it's not that it helped me to get to this specific job title or this business. It's that uh, it helped me show up that way regardless of what my job title was.
That's incredible. It's so cool. So cool. So we've talked about like all sorts of different aspects of this journey, but you mentioned that along that time period, you also became a father. And I wonder if you'd be open to talking about like how does that fit in the storyline? How did that impact your choices?
Yeah, before he was born in August of 2023, I had all these fears of my career needs to be here, and when he's born, I'm not going to have the time to do what I want to do. And my two needs that feel really important to me are freedom and autonomy. Freedom being, yeah, I can choose where I want to live and how I engage in my time, and autonomy is kind of the same thing, that I get to be in charge. I get to create the life that matters to me, and that felt like having a son would infringe upon that. Having a child would infringe upon that in a really big way. And so, as my wife was more and more pregnant and August 2023 was nearing, I felt like I had to cram all this stuff in because my life was going to shift immeasurably. And I was right about one of those things. My life did shift immeasurably, but I didn't feel the scarcity around time and the scarcity around money that I thought I would. That was another one, right? It wasn't just freedom and autonomy. There was financial scarcity too. Like, how am I going to be able to keep going at the rate that I'm going while having a kid? I'm going to run out of money at some point, which was just a story. It wasn't a truth, but that's all precursor to say that when he was born, there was immediately this sense of God. On one hand, this clear sense of like this urgency around my purpose, that every single moment was a chance to model the type of person that I aspired to be, and to clean up when I wasn't the type of person that I aspired to be. The the consequences and repercussions felt realer than ever, and I was no longer just reporting to myself and my wife, that there were this really tiny human, uh, I was to report to him every single day, and so it became really imperative that I showed up the way that uh, I wanted to show up. Or put another way, I if I felt like I wasn't in integrity, or wasn't telling the full truth in my life, I felt I didn't have to, I couldn't just be stuck in my own little world anymore. I had this living, breathing human being that I felt really responsible for, and not just responsible for like I need to change his diaper, but for his emotional well-being, and making sure that if I were to tell him something, I best be modeling it, or else he's going to internalize the thing that I'm modeling and not the thing that I'm saying. Even though he's too young at that age, it just, like, that clicked for me really soon after he was born. Maybe not the moment, but it might have been. It was somewhere really early on. And so, yeah, I think the preconceived notion was that I'd be more cautious when he was born, but the opposite happened. I was bolder and felt like, you know what, if this matters to me, I owe it to myself and my family to go for it, because if I don't, my family is going to actually pay for that. And that's part of what led me to make I'll put a real number on it. I invested $8,000 to work with the business coach I worked with last year, and that was after he was very shortly after he was born. And I've since invested tens of thousands of dollars in working with coaches, and have left my stable source of income. All I tie that to parenthood, because I felt like this is what I want to model. I want to model to my son that when you know, that you have, it's almost a responsibility and a duty to follow through on what you know, and to share what you know. And there was no shame anymore about the fact that I wasn't ready in November of 2021, but I was ready in February of 2025. And so that's one part of it, was just there was this felt sense of urgency. And then, a really practical one was, as I was speaking about a little bit earlier, I was in enough pain at my accounting job that it was really impacting my relationship with my wife and the way that I was able to show up to my son. And so this wasn't just a move for, wow, Mike is like doing his thing and living his purpose and is like living the dream that he set out for his whole life. Uh, it was a really practical, well, I'm going to be a better dad if I do this thing. So I want to do the thing that makes me a better dad and makes me a better partner. And I feel that every day. I'm touched to say that. I mean, I feel way more present and available to be with my son on a daily basis. And so there's a moment to moment, at least twice a day. I'm spending multiple hours with him in the morning and the evening, and the weekends, the whole days. These constant feedback loops of, God, Mike, if you're not taking care of yourself, look at the consequences of not taking care of yourself. You are not going to be able to show up for your son. And that's so, like, it's the most important job I could ever imagine. I want to be there for him in every way. I want to be present when he's excited about something. I want to be there for him if he's upset or feeling anger. And I'm far from perfect. I find myself impatient all the time and getting poked in all the ways uh, that I need to, and my limitations are revealed all the time. But I owe it to myself and to my family to at least create the best conditions possible for success in my all areas of my life. And that's where I'm at right now. That might change in a week from now and in a month from now, but all we got is what we know in the here and now. So that's a kind of, is there more there that would be worth exploring around fatherhood? I mean, it's such a rich topic.
Well, I love hearing how it found, like, I guess, what impact it had in this particular arc. Where it's also leading me is just, I would imagine all of the personal development work you've done through this journey, you find it showing up in all the aspects of your life. So I'm curious if there are any that stand out to you as being like most impactful from this journey.
A few things come to mind. One is when my son was born and we weren't sleeping and I was being stretched in all the ways. I felt this deep well of anger bubble up in me time and time again. An anger that was so big that I was really terrified of myself. And the personal development and inner work was so helpful at that point because I had learned, I had developed enough of a skill set and was still working with Yotam and working with other coaches that helped me not make it a bad thing that I was experiencing anger, but learned how to foster gentleness and compassion towards myself and to get curious about the anger and not judge it. So that's still, it's not like I've overcome that and fully resolved it. That's still there, but I think there's a couple of meanings that I've attributed to that anger. One is there's the anger wants to protect my needs, and that's something that I haven't been that I still struggle with today is like being a stand for what matters to me and my boundaries and my autonomy, and that Mike Trugman's an individual person, and sometimes he doesn't feel like being a dad, and it's okay to feel frustration and anger of like, it's so, God, let me just be in victim mode right now. Like, it's not fair that I'm going through all these things right now. And yeah, that's one thing that comes to mind is that the inner work has really helped me to navigate uncomfortable emotions and big emotions like anger. I have a deep need to feel appreciated and recognized, and there's a lot of resentment that harbors in me when I don't feel appreciated and recognized, and I still carry this story that makes me needy and less than. And I'm learning to be more accepting towards myself, that it's a beautiful thing to be appreciated and recognized, and it's okay to ask for those things. And even if I weren't to fully believe that, like, all this resentment is being stored up in me if I don't ask for it. So let's do our best to not let it get there. That's been a really big one for me. So requests for appreciation from my wife for simple things, unloading the dishwasher, the examples that you always hear, doing the dishes, or just like doing some other simple things. Or I want to be seen for being like a really good and caring dad right now, being willing to ask for that, not from a place of neediness, but like, this feels important to me. Could you please see me for being like a really caring father? So interestingly, being a parent has allowed me to develop more of a skill set for asking for what I need and for going for what I need and want. And I think that being a parent is really messy. And I was really good at controlling a lot of conditions in my life before he was born that are no longer controllable. And that has made me a lot more flexible. For example, he's sick and can't go to daycare, and I had 6 calls on my calendar today that all need to be moved or canceled. Like, that used to be something that I could still find myself being really rigid and like, I'm not allowing that to happen and totally resisting life. And being a parent cracks that open. And luckily, I have developed enough of skill set to look at myself and like, how was I contributing to the suffering there? And even uh I'll share one example. I remember there was a day in October where that very thing happened. We couldn't send our son to daycare, and I had a lot of calls that day, and one of them was with a potential client that I was really excited about working with. And I allowed myself to get in victimhood for like an hour. It took a while. It's like, this isn't fair. It's not. Why can't you, my wife? I was like, why can't you take the day off? Why do I have to take the day off? Just because I've created a life with more flexibility, so I'm now the one that's responsible. And then eventually, it's like, all right, let me slow down. And the ones that needed to be canceled, I canceled them or rescheduled. And the one that was with a potential new client, I wondered, what might be the gift in this needing to be moved? And I was leading a workshop that Friday that was for clients only, but I said, I'll invite her to that workshop. And she came, and we had the workshop in the morning, and then later that day she did the initial session with me to determine if we were a good fit to work together, and we're still working together now. And allowing myself to be more flexible, which allowed for creativity, allowed for me to uh, respond to life in a much more productive way rather than be as reactive as I've been in the past.
That's awesome. I love that story. And it just shows like throughout this entire story you've been telling, like when you kind of unearth the discomfort and start to understand how to work with it, it opens up so much creativity. You know, the creativity in that situation, the creativity to work part-time at an accounting firm, the creativity to start doing breath work workshops at right? So none of I don't I really believe none of that creativity, maybe it wouldn't have existed if you had not learned to be with everything else that was coming up.
Yeah, that's right.
So many good nuggets. Are there other things that are feeling really present for you that you're feeling called to share as part of this conversation?
Yeah, there's two things. I'll say them at high level and then we can dive deeper. One, which actually was partly inspired by you, Erin, is that after my last day at my accounting firm, I took a 2 week sabbatical, and it could be interesting to talk about things that surfaced during that sabbatical. And then another I think could be interesting to talk about is what does success look like right now? Like how do I look at what success means given everything that's transpired in the last couple of months? So the sabbatical, yeah, I think that in the theme of taking space surfaces whatever needs to come up. And I think there were a few things came up for me when I took the space. I took 2 weeks in between the last day and when I started to do dedicated work towards building my business. And in those 2 weeks, I allowed my kind of inner child to do what he wanted to do and spent lots of time outside and read a fiction book and went to coffee shops and did a couple of wellness experiences and yoga classes and did a lot of the cliche and typical things that someone does when they have a lot of free time. I didn't open my laptop once. I had days where I didn't look at my phone, but I still had my phone present. And on the first day, I did a very coaching thing. I made a list of what were the things from Accountant Mike that I wanted to bring into my next venture. So what did coaching Mike want to keep from accounting Mike? And what were some things I wanted to let go of? And that was a really practical thing to do when in a moment of transition. But I share all the things that I did during the sabbatical to say on paper it looked amazing. And there were times that I felt elated, but I also had huge anxiety. And again, like repressed anger is this thing that every time that there's space, it seems to come up at the most inopportune times. There was one day, it wasn't the full day, but a big portion of my day on during the sabbatical that I was doing I was doing all these different things to try and understand my anger. I did breath work, I was doing meditation, I was journaling. And there was a moment, I mean, if you're watching on video, this bed right behind me was holding me for like 3 hours of like my body was shaking and there was all this anger moving through me and like all this stuff that was buried previously in the space that was created, it surfaced and it was deeply uncomfortable. And I was a lot of times resisting it. But what I learned from that is that it's really important to have space in my life, not just to like do sprints and then, when it's absolutely necessary and I'm on the verge of burnout, to have space. That's a byproduct of not giving myself enough space. So that in the sabbatical, it wasn't just joy and walking over the Brooklyn Bridge. It was also, God, all these uncomfortable emotions that are coming up for me. And there's just like new levels to it all the time. And the anxiety, there was this pressure of like, God, is this really the right thing? I mean, I was stepping into uncharted territory for myself. And so of course there was a level of anxiety. So it feels important to, in the spirit of full authenticity, that was a huge part of the last couple of months for me. And then success. What does success look like to me now? There was a deep knowing within me that this was the right choice, and I followed that. And it's people like to talk about trust the process, and it's about the process and not the results. But uh, I know when I'm in a coaching session with someone and they're going deep with me, I'm where I'm supposed to be right now, and I might need to get a job in a month or two. That doesn't mean that this was a failure. It's already a success. I listened to what I knew was true within myself, and I believe that good things always come as a result of that. But not only good things come as a result of that, but I get to, like, I can feel in my bones on some level every single morning I wake up and like, I'm so grateful for the life that I get to live right now, and that I get to create this day, and that there's so many things that are new to me, but that's exciting. And they're the challenges that I want to opt into. And like, that's what success looks like to me now. Yeah. So we'll see where it goes, Erin. That feels like we'll see where it goes, and the unknown can be exciting things and not just things that we need to like control and plan around.
Yeah. Well, and you've built all this muscle in navigating the unknown, right? This whole period you've just described, like all of those things, hopefully are building your self-trust that this is just another chapter of learning, experimentation, seeking support, all the things that you've been repping for a
Yeah.
while now.
Yeah. So that feels like a pretty complete picture. I'm curious, Erin, if there's anything before we come to a close here. Is there anything else that you think would be an interesting thread to pull on? And if not, then this was already a really rich and full conversation for me.
Yeah. Really just that I appreciate you sharing back to what you said in the beginning of marking this point in time and sharing when you're right in the thick of it. I experienced much of what, when you were describing that 2 week sabbatical, the break that I took was much longer in between leaving my career chapter and starting this new entrepreneurial chapter. And it was a quiet period for me. I didn't know what to say. Like, there were so many highs and lows. I was like, what's the recap on this? This is so messy. And so I just really appreciate that you're in that messiness now and leaning into just sharing all the parts of it and the detail around what came before and what created this part. So I just sit here with a lot of appreciation.
Yeah, goes both ways. I appreciate you, Erin, for really. I shared this with you when we initially spoke, that I feel this immense safety when I'm speaking to you. And despite doing this thing over 100 times, I still feel like there were tender things that felt hard to share today. And I really, I felt called to do this conversation with you, and I really appreciate your genuine curiosity and your ability to help me connect lots of dots that paint a full picture, because that was, to circle back to the intention around this conversation, it was to give like a real sincere authentic taste of what it's like to do this, to walk this path right now. So thank you for that. Thank you for this gift.
Yeah, and for those listening, it's like the Steve Jobs quote where you can't connect the dots forward, right? It makes so much sense to listen to your dots in this conversation, but if you were to go back to that moment in 2018, you would have never known that, all the components of that journey. So it's just like, what's the first dot? And then keep going, and the next one, and the next one.
That's it. That's it right there. Well, to
Amazing.
everyone, yeah, to thanks again, Erin, and to everyone who's listening. I hope that you got something out of it. We covered a lot of ground, so I'm sure there's at least one thing that stood out to you from this conversation. And like I invited in the beginning of the conversation, I am in the midst until June 20th of coaching 100 people in 100 days, and so if you want to take me up on that, I think it's a really beautiful opportunity to get to experience. A lot of people that signed up haven't experienced coaching before, and it's a really beautiful way to make big changes happen in your life. We certainly covered some of those ways today, and so yeah, definitely encourage you to take me up on that. I'm gonna put a link in the show notes where you can schedule some time. And I particularly have really been enjoying working with people who are in the same kind of position that I was, like feeling like they've outgrown their previous chapter of life, whether it's a relationship that you're wanting to let go of, a career that you're wanting to let go of, or like you're in touch with something that really you want in your life and want someone to support you in making that feel more tangible. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to, get some support on that with me. So we'll end the conversation here. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Erin, thanks again for co-hosting this with me. And yeah, whether you're listening or watching, I just wish you a really beautiful rest of your day. I hope that you can embrace all parts of yourself and be gentle and kind to yourself and wherever you are. Yeah, that's where you're meant to be. No need to rush it along. Nice and slow, and take some space.
Slowly is the fastest way.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to Mike's Search for Meaning. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and leave a review. I look forward to seeing you next time, my friends. And until then, stay safe, stay well, and keep living with purpose. Peace.